Hey everyone! It's now been more than 3 years since I started this indie dev YouTube journey, but I started making games and programming way before that. I'm getting really old now. The first things I remember programming when I was really young was these kind of Mad Lib games where I'd just prompt my friends to type some words and then I'd use these words to replace them in a sentence. So this was really simple, but I was like maybe 10 or 12 at the time, and it was a lot of fun reading those sentences with my friends. Now, for a long time after that, I don't really remember working on much gaming contents or programming, but around college, I started looking into making some stuff again. Sadly, I couldn't find much more stuff I did from like 30 years ago, but I did find my final project in university, which was supposed to be an attempt at applying all the concepts and patterns and programming architectures and stuff that we'd learned throughout our years at the university. So it didn't really matter what the final result was as long as we were using internally all the stuff we'd learned. So, as you might be able to tell, I was kind of big into Dance Dance Revolution at that time, so I was trying to make like a rhythm game. But yeah, the gameplay is pretty shitty. There's like just these three notes passing on the screen, but internally there's a lot of stuff going on. So that was a kind of fun project that I keep thinking I'd like to revisit one day. After university, I worked for a couple of different companies until I finally landed my first professional job. Because if you didn't know, I actually worked 8 years in a mobile game company called Gameloft. And I made quite a bunch of games and that made a lot of money at that time. My first released project was released nearly 12 years ago and was Asphalt 6, where I worked on fixing a bunch of bugs and working on the camera and doing all sorts of gameplay related features. Then I moved on to Asphalt 7, where I worked on the visuals, the car paint, the liveries, and the decals you can apply on the car, and a lot of very interesting stuff. And I learned a lot about car physics and car engine sounds and all of these kind of things. And because of that, maybe, after I finished working on Asphalt 7, I was moved to the Gangster projects. And at that time, they were working on Gangster 4 Vegas. And I was brought on board to work on the sound design systems and a little bit the cutscene system. So I wouldn't be actually making sound, that's the sound designer part, but I'd be helping integrate them. And one of the things I worked a lot on is tuning the car engine noise. Because if you're working with a sound designer that loves cars, whew, you've got a lot of work ahead of you, because they want every crack and pop and engine turbo sound and gear shift to sound just right for the type of car you're driving. But programming all of this on basically an iPhone 4, which is a potato compared to nowadays mobile phone, well, it was quite the challenge. After Gangster 4 was released, we kind of started again from scratch working on Gangster 5 New Orleans. And this was a really big project. We use a whole different engine, and I work from the ground up, working on everything from the physics to the gameplay to the character control, the animations, and the sound and everything in between. And it was a really big challenge because these kind of games, like, they're basically everything. They're racing games, they're, first person shooter, third person shooter, story driven. They've got everything. So it's an amazing piece of work. And I think technically it was really one of the most complicated challenge I've ever faced. Then Gameloft started shifting its focus from the kind of AAA mobile game to the much more successful casual mobile game. And I started working on a very, very short-lived match 3 game called Puzzle Pets. Now, this was also really fun to work on because we were basically two programmers working on the foundation of the game, and we tried to make it so it was deterministic and we could run it without any of the visuals, so we could run script that would play the game incredibly fast to be able to let the game designer test some scenarios and see like if the level could be completed and how hard it was to complete and all of this kind of statistics. So that was a really fun project too. And then finally we get to one of the last projects I worked on at Gameloft before I left. This was called Overdrive City, and it's kind of a city builder game where you have to repair cars and race cars and stuff like that. In Overdrive City I worked mostly on all the tutorial stuff, so you had to set up how to do the tutorials and all this kind of stuff, and I worked a lot on the optimization side of things because, you know, we wanted really high resolution cars, but, you know, it still has to run on a mobile phone. When I was working at Gameloft, I'd often get the urge to explore some programming concept a little bit deeper. Because when you're working professionally, sometimes you just need to fix something, and once it's fixed, you move on to the next task. But you keep thinking, like, why did this work? What exactly is the underlying concept around this? And maybe you don't have time to explore it, but when you go back home, well, I had fun trying to explore it. And one of the things I had to work on was the programmable pipeline, because it might sound a little bit crazy, but the first iPhones didn't have shaders. So this was a big change when, you know, we started supporting adding shaders and programmable pipeline and VBO and all this kind of stuff. So I wanted to understand this a little bit more, and I figured I could try making an engine that could render basically Minecraft worlds. So I made a little Minecraft clone, but my whole point was to create it from scratch, exploring all the new OpenGL stuff using shaders and instancing and VBO and all this kind of stuff. It's not much, but I learned a lot about stuff like culling or instancing or VBO, and also, you know, procedural generation, optimizing data structure, noise algorithm, and all of this kind of stuff I actually programmed myself in C++. At some point, I really got interested in making a game that would be in a real space where the distance would be realistic. And I had no idea how to store such a huge distance between stars. But that's where I discovered something called Big Int, where you can store basically any size of number you want, and you can do operations on them. So I started implementing that, and I figured I'd do it in C# using Unity so that I could make a game out of it. And I made this little top-down space shooter prototype where all the distances are real, but they get compressed the further you are from anything else. So basically, at first, you get really close to an object, you'll be in 1:1 scale, and you can, you know, like have a shooting fight with some AI or board a space station or something like that. But the further away you get, the faster you go because the compression factor, the warp factor gets bigger. And I think it's a really interesting concept, but there was some really big problems. First of all, there wasn't really any interesting gameplay, and I didn't know really what I should make it. And also, performance started dropping drastically because, you know, doing operation on 250 bytes, well, it's a little bit expensive. And then some of the other stuff I worked on wasn't really games per se, but they might have been game related. You know, I wrote a bunch of Python scripts to play Clash Royale and EVE Online, and I've made video about them before, so you can check them out in the corner. And around that time, I got really into machine learning too, so I made a lot of scripts to try different machine learning concepts, where I made like an AI learn tic-tac-toe, or an AI try to do sentiment analysis on stock market, or an AI trying to detect pitch in piano notes and stuff like that. But the characteristic of most of these projects is that they are not very visual, and well, most of them have failed. I haven't actually gotten them to work properly. Another thing I've talked about on this channel is this little game I made for my kids to practice reading, where there's a word showing up on screen and you have to choose the image that corresponds to the word. And with the little leaderboard, since I have 2 kids, well, they had a lot of fun competing against who is the fastest reading and all of that. So that was kind of a success and an actual game. It was while I was iterating on ideas for using my Big Int library and my space game prototype that I got the idea for Solar Rogue. I really love roguelikes, like the traditional one, turn-based, where the whole point is the exploration and the discovery and learning what each of the items you find do and using strategies to outwit your enemies. And I wanted to capture this feeling, but I wanted to do it in a space opera kind of setting. So that's where Solar Rogue was born, and now it's a game on Steam that you can download and play. So if you'd like to learn more about it, well, you can check the links in the description below. I always link to my little game on Steam, and if you want to drop a wish list or something, it's really appreciated, so thank you. Finally, we get into some of the recent stuff I've been working on. I've been trying to port some of my 2D sprites for Solar Rogue into 3D, and I've been having a lot of fun doing that, but I wanted to put them in some kind of game, so I've been working on making a kind of space shooter online multiplayer thing. It's mostly to explore how the 3D and the online multiplayer stuff works in Godot, but it's also kind of fun to try out different, gameplay loops or, control schemes and all of that. But it's not quite at the point where I think it could be a game that would be fun to play, but it's still fun to explore and test and check out what it looks like. I tried to find some of the more crappy stuff I have stored somewhere from like the last 20 years, but I couldn't find the whole hard disk from my old computers. But if I ever find them again, I know they're here somewhere, then maybe I could make an update video showing you all my really crappy developer skill and how it got better throughout the years. But for now, this is probably going to be the last video of 2021, so I wanted to wish everyone a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and see you all in 2022 in my next episode. Bye!